Hey, I'm Nikki. I run the social media channels Purelychicken, and I'm the author of Chicken Keeping Pure and Simple. And today we're talking about molting because it's almost fall and my chickens are already molting. So let's get into it. I polled my Instagram followers to find out their most common molting questions. I'm going to answer those at the end of this video. So what is molting anyway? Molting is basically when chickens drop their old tattered feathers and... All right, Mike. And they grow new ones. They usually drop those feathers as fall is approaching, and they do this so they can have nice, fluffy, brand new feathers for winter to help keep them warm. They don't usually molt their first fall. Mike! They don't usually molt their first fall though, because chickens usually don't have that first big molt until they're around 16 months old, and that usually doesn't happen their first year. But that's not to say there aren't those oddball chickens who molt their first fall. That can happen too. Chickens will molt a few times before they are full-grown hens and roosters. So those pullets and those cockerels will molt a few mini molts before they're full-grown and before they have their real feathers. So you're probably going to notice some feathers dropping when they're young too. But the molt we're talking about today is their big molt that happens in that fall time. So how do chickens know when to molt? The thing that triggers a fall molt is the drop in daylight hours. So after that summer solstice, when daylight hours start to diminish, you're going to notice that chickens will start to molt. My chickens have molted anywhere from like late summer, August time, and then some of them have even started their molt in the dead of winter in January. Their molt can last anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, unfortunately. Basically, less light is telling their pituitary gland that they need to start molting for winter. Now, usually cold weather does start to happen around this time, but that is not what triggers it. The cold weather doesn't, it's always the light. So what are we looking for? You're gonna wake up one day and you're gonna see a ton of feathers everywhere. The first time this happened to me, I thought, oh my gosh, a raccoon got in my coop last night, but really it was just the molt starting. Sometimes you'll get one that drops everything and you're like, wow, yesterday you had feathers, today you look really haggard. Or sometimes it happens slowly and the chickens lose just a few feathers or they lose them slowly over time. There's two kinds of molts, a hard molt and a soft molt, and sometimes there's molts in between. But a hard molt is when you wake up one morning and you go check on your chickens and there's just feathers everywhere. Somebody dropped all their feathers in the middle of the night, or sometimes they do it during the day. And then a soft molt is where you just find feathers randomly and you start to see them kind of accumulate over time, and you may not even notice that that chicken is molting, or you may have to investigate to see which chicken is molting. But when they have a hard molt, you'll know who it is because they just look really bad. To verify that your chickens are indeed molting, you're going to look for something called pin feathers. Pin feathers are the new feathers that are growing in, and they have like a waxy sheath around them until they're all the way out, and then the sheath starts to come off and the chickens will preen that off themselves. Another thing you're going to notice, or you might notice, is a drop in egg production. Most of the time when chickens are molting, they don't lay eggs or they slow down their egg production by a whole lot. There are some breeds out there who are supposed to lay all winter long, even if they're molting. I have one, a Brahma. She does not lay eggs during the winter though. So let's talk about how you can support your chickens during a molt. The first thing you're going to do is avoid handling them, because chickens are in pain when they're molting. It's not comfortable for them, and you just don't want to be handling them and hurting those pin feathers. Speaking of those pin feathers, it's really important to have a plan if you find one that's kind of broken on the chicken. They can get damaged, and pin feathers have a blood supply in them, and you want to make sure you know what to do if one breaks. So if you find a chicken with a broken pin feather, you want to disinfect that feather first because we don't want germs getting in there. So I like to use like Vetricin spray or a tea tree oil, something like that. And then you can take like a clotting agent, like a Quick Stop, or like just some cornstarch, and put some pressure to that pin feather, try to get the bleeding to stop. If the pin feather doesn't stop bleeding, you're gonna have to pull it at the base. The best way I found to do this is with pliers. You can just hold the pliers as far down on the feather as you can. Don't grasp any of the skin. Hold the skin taut with your other hand and pull it out in one swift motion. You also want to keep the feathers cleaned up as best as you can, because feathers that are on the ground will attract mites and lice and things like that. So clean those feathers up as often as possible. They need extra protein to grow those feathers. So that's part of the reason they don't lay eggs. They're kind of rerouting those protein sources to growing new feathers. One way you can support them during this time is to give them a higher protein feed. So if you're feeding them a layer feed, you probably want to switch to something like a chick grower or an off-lock feed. that does have a higher protein content. Some other high protein sources that we like to give our chickens during this time are scrambled eggs. Yes, you can scramble their own eggs back to them. It's a really high source of protein and they actually really love it. So perfectly fine to do that. They won't start eating their eggs, don't worry. Icelandic kelp is another good source of protein. It kind of comes like real fine and it's hard for them to pick up. So mix it into some wet food. That would be a great way to give it to them. And then our favorite source of protein is black soldier fly grubs. I used to not give that to the chickens during the molt time. And then when I switched to giving them the high protein grubs, the difference in the feather growth was amazing, especially for those chickens who have a really hard time growing back their feathers for some reason. The black soldier fly grubs were really helpful. Shout out to our favorite brand, Eatin' Pet and Pasture. I've linked them for you down below. My code for them is Purelychickens. You can use that at any time to get a discount on their grubs. They also have hemp bedding, which we love, and the aspen nest pads too. One thing I'll advise against is something that I see recommended in every chicken group every single year, which is cat food. Cat food is formulated for cats and their nutritional needs, not for chickens. It just really doesn't make sense to give them something that's not balanced for their nutrition. If you could just up their protein by switching to a chicken feed, and chicken feed is actually really well studied, and cat food with chickens, not so much. I have this one chicken who just is really interested in this video. Hi, Caswell. You're gonna have that one chicken who randomly molts in the middle of winter. For that, you're gonna wanna give them some sort of heat source. We don't like to use heat lamps because they're really dangerous and they can cause a fire really quickly. The best heat source that I have found for chickens, especially if you're going to be putting it inside their coop, is a sweeter heater. I'll link it down below for you guys. I have 2 of them in my coop. I take them out during the warmer months, but I do hang them above their roosting bars just to keep them warm, especially during the coldest parts of the day. And if you have a chicken who's, you know, completely bald in the middle of winter, you'll notice that they might hang out underneath them. It doesn't really heat the whole coop, but it does kind of take the chill off around the chickens, especially when they're sleeping. There are suggestions out there that tell you to give the chickens artificial light to keep them laying eggs during the fall and winter. You can research that on your own. We don't do that because I don't want my chickens using their resources for eggs when nature is telling them to use it for their feathers. You'll find that if you do give artificial light, you might have chickens who don't grow feathers back the right way, and then they're going to be looking haggard all year. In my opinion, it's just better to let the chickens grow their feathers back and do what nature intended. Let them use their resources for those feathers. Because molting is so stressful, you can periodically provide like probiotics and electrolytes for your chickens, and you can just do that right in their water. There's plenty of supplements out there. I'll link my favorites down below. All right, the girls and I are going to answer a few of the common questions that I got when I pulled my Instagram followers about their questions for molting. The first one is, how long does molting last? Unfortunately, I can't give you an exact time frame. I've had it last a few weeks for some chickens, but most of the time it's a month or 2. Question number 2, my rooster has damaged my hen's feathers from mating all year. Will they grow back with the molt? Yes, hopefully, as long as their skin isn't damaged and scarred over, the rooster's damage will be erased with the molt. If you have a chicken who's being mated too much during a molt and it's damaging her skin and it's probably causing some pain with those pin feathers, you can put on a hen mating saddle during the daytime. I would suggest taking it off at night though, so she's not dealing with it while her feathers are trying to grow in as much as possible. This question came up multiple times. People want to know, my chickens are acting moody and crabby. Is that normal? Absolutely. Molting is painful for the chickens. You'll notice that they will just like not be moving around. You'll almost think that they could possibly be sick. They're really just trying to deal with the pain of the molt. This is Caswell. She is molting right now. You can't really see any missing feathers, but if I were to dig through there, you could see her pin feathers. But if you see how she's acting, she's kind of fluffed up and she's just kind of ticked off. She is not happy about this molt starting. If I didn't know better, I would think that she's sick, but I know that she is already going through her molt, and she does this every year where she just acts really mad about it. Another question that came up is, do chickens lose weight during a molt? I have not noticed actual weight gain, but they do look like they've lost weight because all their down feathers are missing. So they, appear to be less weight, but really they just are not as fluffy. Hi, ladies. People want to know, do roosters molt? Yes, they do. My rooster absolutely looks horrible during his molt. His beautiful tail feathers are gone. His saddle feathers are missing. But really, when the molt is finished, he comes back more beautiful every single year. All right, what about those chickens with feathers on their feet? People want to know, have you ever seen an ingrown feather on a chicken? Yes, I have. My chickens with feathered feet will sometimes get one that just doesn't come through correctly. And you're going to kind of treat it like you do an ingrown hair on a human. You want to release that skin so that feather can get out. So you might have to use like a scalpel or something like that. Then you're going to treat it like a wound. So disinfect it. That Vetericyn spray is going to come in handy again. You could put some tea tree oil on it to prevent infection, or wrap it and put some Neosporin on it. You want to make sure you're not using the Neosporin with pain relief though. Just use the regular plain kind. All right, next question. Can chickens molt other times of the year besides the fall? And yes, they can. If they're molting, end of summer all the way through winter, that's probably their regular molt. But if they're molting other times like spring and summer, that's probably a stress molt. Stress molts can happen from injury or illness. It can happen if you're adding new chickens into the group, bullying, pecking, malnutrition, dehydration. If you're moving chickens to a new property, if they are without food and water for a period of time, or if there's been presence of predators, those things can all cause a stress molt. Another question that popped up is my chicken molting from like a normal seasonal molt, or are their feathers being picked out by another chicken? That can be hard to know. One thing you're going to want to look for are those pin feathers. If you open up their feathers and you peek around and you see pin feathers popping out, that is most likely just a normal seasonal molt. But if your chickens are missing feathers, like they're going bald in certain areas, or their skin is red and inflamed, that was a nice jump. If their skin is red and inflamed, then you're going to want to look at other causes. Are they being feather picked? Are they dealing with mites or lice? Depluming mites are hard to find because you can't see them. They live under the skin. So you might want to do like a mite treatment. I like to use Elector PSP. And then if it's just around their back end, it could just be like a vent gleat. I have a whole highlight on my Instagram about vent gleat if you want to go check it out and see how to deal with it. And then the last common question that people were asking was, where do they lose feathers? Like, what part of the body will you notice the feathers coming off? This is really dependent on the chicken. Sometimes you'll only see it in certain spots. Sometimes you'll see it kind of scattered throughout. Sometimes it'll be really heavy. Sometimes it'll be really light. I've had chickens who molt all over, some who molt in patchy spots. But if you don't see those pin feathers, you want to investigate, is it something else that they're dealing with besides a molt? Because those pin feathers are going to be your clue that it is an actual seasonal molt. How many times have I said molt in this video? I think a lot. All right, thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys are following me here on YouTube and Instagram, TikTok, and I'm also on Facebook. We have a Facebook community group. It's called Purelychickens Community. You can head over there if you have questions and you want other people to answer them. There's a lot of experienced chicken keepers there. I'll put all my social links down below so you can follow me on all the platforms that you love. While you're in the caption, go check out my book. You can grab it on Amazon. And until next time, keep chicken keeping pure and simple.